What if the best player on Team USA is also the most isolated person in the room? Not injured, not struggling, not playing bad. Actually, the exact opposite. She's leading the team, outscoring everyone, running the offense like it's her personal system. And still, somehow, she looks completely alone. And then the footage drops. No warning, no explanation. Just a quick pan across the locker room. Teammates laughing, joking, moving like a unit. And then, her. Standing off to the side. Head down. Silent. Completely disconnected. Not for a second. Not for a moment. The entire clip. And that's when the internet did what it always does. Zoomed in, slowed it down, and started asking questions nobody inside that locker room is answering. Because this isn't just about body language. This feels like something deeper. Something that doesn't show up on the stat sheet. And once you start looking closer, the story gets a lot more uncomfortable than anyone expected. The clip itself isn't long, and that's what makes it even more unsettling. It doesn't try to prove anything. It doesn't explain anything. It just shows a moment, and lets you sit with it. The camera moves through the locker room like it's capturing something routine. Teammates are loose, relaxed, laughing with each other in a way that feels natural, almost effortless. It's the kind of energy you expect from a team that's winning, a group that's comfortable together, locked in but still enjoying the moment. Nothing about it feels staged. Nothing feels forced. And then the frame shifts. Off to the side, almost like she's deliberately outside of the scene, Caitlin is just there. Not engaging. Not reacting. Not even pretending to be part of the moment. Her head is slightly down, her posture closed off, her attention completely detached from everything happening around her. It's not anger. It's not frustration in an obvious way. It's something quieter, and somehow heavier. What really caught people off guard wasn't just that she looked serious. Athletes lock in all the time. That's normal. It was the contrast. The complete difference in energy between her and everyone else in the room. It felt like two different environments existing in the same space. One loud, connected, alive. The other silent, distant, almost shut off. And the more people watched it, the more details started to stand out. Every time the camera drifted near her, she didn't suddenly switch it on. No smile. No wave. No quick adjustment to play it off for the lens. If anything, she stayed exactly the same. Almost like she knew the camera was there, and chose not to acknowledge it at all. That's when the interpretations started to split. Some people saw focus. A player locked into her own mindset, blocking out distractions, treating the moment like business instead of a social event. To them, this wasn't strange. It was discipline. The kind of tunnel vision you only see in players who are completely obsessed with winning. But others saw something completely different. They saw distance. Disconnection. A player who didn't just look focused, but looked removed. Like she wasn't part of the group at all. And in a team environment, especially one this high stakes, that kind of separation doesn't just get ignored. It raises questions. Because body language like that doesn't exist in a vacuum. Comes from somewhere. And the more the clip circulated, the more people started asking the same thing. If everything is fine inside that locker room, why does it look like this? And that's when people started digging deeper. Because once you move past the clip, the numbers tell a story that makes this whole situation even harder to explain. Here's where the story stops being just a body language debate, and starts turning into something a lot harder to explain. Because if Caitlin was struggling, if she was having a bad tournament, if she looked disconnected and underperforming, none of this would even be a conversation. The clip would just get brushed off as a player going through a rough stretch. But that's not what's happening here. Not even close. While that locker room clip shows someone completely removed from the group, the numbers on the court tell the exact opposite story. Caitlin isn't just playing well. She's quietly been the most productive player on the entire roster. She's leading the team in scoring. Not by accident, not by one breakout game, but consistently. Every time she steps on the floor, she's generating offense in a way no one else is matching. And it's not just scoring either. She's creating for others, controlling tempo, making reads that turn average possessions into easy buckets. And then you look at efficiency, and it gets even more uncomfortable. She's shooting at a level that doesn't just help the team, it carries them. High percentages, smart shot selection, deep range that stretches defenses in ways most international teams simply aren't built to handle. Add in her assist numbers, and suddenly you're not just looking at a scorer, you're looking at the engine of the entire system. That's what makes the next part so confusing. Because despite all of that, she's not being treated like the centerpiece. She's not consistently starting. She's not the one being pushed forward as the face of these wins. And in a tournament where performance is supposed to dictate opportunity, that gap between production and positioning starts to feel intentional. Think about it for a second. How does the player leading in points, facilitating the offense, and putting up the most efficient numbers end up with a limited role compared to others who aren't producing at the same level? That's not a small inconsistency. That's a disconnect. And people notice that kind of thing. Fans started pulling up box scores, comparing minutes, looking at rotations, and the more they looked, the harder it became to ignore. Because it wasn't just one game. It wasn't just one decision. It was a pattern. A quiet one, but a pattern nonetheless. And when you combine that with the locker room footage, it starts to paint a picture that feels off. On the court, she's the one driving the results. Off the court, she looks like someone who isn't even part of the group. Those two realities aren't supposed to exist at the same time. Unless there's something happening behind the scenes that we're not being told. And that's exactly where the conversation started to shift. Because once fans realized the stats didn't line up with the treatment, they stopped just watching the games. And started paying attention to everything else. Especially what wasn't being shown. Once people started noticing the gap between performance and treatment, the focus shifted somewhere else entirely. To what wasn't happening. Because in a tournament like this, there's a rhythm everyone expects. Big win, post-game interviews, key players at the podium, media asking questions, sound bites circulating online. It's part of the machine. It's how narratives are built, how stars are elevated, how fans stay connected to what's really going on. And somehow, Caitlin just isn't there. Game after game, win after win, the cameras roll, the microphones come out, and the same pattern repeats. Teammates step forward. Coaches speak. Questions get answered. Headlines get written. But the player leading the team in production? Nowhere to be found. Not once. Not even briefly. And at first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Maybe it was timing. Maybe it was rotation. Maybe it just hadn't lined up yet. But as the games kept stacking up, that explanation started to fall apart. Because this isn't random anymore. It's consistent. And consistency like that doesn't happen by accident. That's when people started asking a different kind of question. Not about her attitude, not about the locker room, but about control. Who decides who speaks? Because in most cases, players don't just opt out of media over and over again, especially when they're performing at the highest level. These moments matter. They build reputation. They shape public perception. And for a player of her profile, staying completely silent while everything else is moving around her, it stands out. Creates a gap. And the internet doesn't like gaps. It fills them. Some people believe it's her choice. That she's intentionally staying away, avoiding the spotlight, focusing strictly on the game. That she doesn't want to play the media role, doesn't care about the narratives, doesn't need validation from microphones and cameras. But others aren't buying that. Because when the best player isn't being put in front of the media, even once, it starts to feel less like a decision, and more like a strategy. A quiet one. But a strategy nonetheless. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Because while Caitlin remains almost invisible in these moments, someone else is becoming very visible. Consistently. Comfortably. Almost like she's stepping into a role that's been left open. And whether that's intentional or not, it's changing the way people see this team. Because now, it's not just about who's performing on the court. It's about who's being presented as the voice of the team. And once you notice that shift, it's impossible to unsee it. While Caitlyn is nowhere near the podium, there's one face that keeps showing up over and over again, and people started noticing that almost immediately. Paige Bueckers. Game after game, she's the one stepping in front of the cameras. Calm, composed, smiling, saying all the right things. And it's not forced, it feels natural. Like she understands exactly what those moments are for, and how to handle them. When reporters ask about the team, she doesn't hesitate. She talks about chemistry, about sacrifice, about how everyone is buying into something bigger than themselves. It's the kind of answer that checks every box: professional, positive, team first. And on the surface, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's exactly what coaches and organizations love. A player who represents the group well, who reinforces unity, who keeps the message clean and controlled. Paige is doing everything right in that sense. She's building an image that fits perfectly within the system. But the moment you place that next to what we're seeing from Caitlyn, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. On one side, you have a player openly embracing the team identity, speaking for the group, reinforcing togetherness every chance she gets. On the other, you have a player who isn't speaking at all, who looks disconnected in the only behind-the-scenes footage we've seen, and who continues to stay out of the public-facing spotlight completely. It's not just different, it feels like two completely opposite approaches happening at the same time, in the same environment. And that's where things start to feel a little uncomfortable. Because when Paige talks about unselfishness and sacrifice, people can't help but replay that locker room clip in their heads. They start connecting dots, whether those dots are actually connected or not. They start wondering, is that just a general statement? Or is it indirectly highlighting something else? No one is saying it outright. There's no direct shots, no obvious tension in words. But sometimes, it's not about what's said, it's about what's felt. And what fans are feeling right now is a growing divide in how these two players are being perceived. Paige is becoming the voice, the face of unity, the one representing the team's identity to the outside world. Caitlyn, meanwhile, is becoming something else entirely. The outlier. The one who doesn't quite fit into that image. And whether that's fair or not doesn't even matter anymore. Because perception moves fast. Faster than facts. Faster than explanations. And once people lock into a narrative, it starts to take on a life of its own. That's exactly what's happening here. Because now, it's no longer just about a clip, or stats, or media appearances. Now it's about roles. Who represents the system? And who seems to exist outside of it? At this point, the conversation stopped being about what actually happened, and started becoming about what people believe is happening. And once the internet reaches that stage, things escalate fast. Because now, it's not just clips and stats anymore, it's interpretation. Everyone watching the same moments, but seeing completely different stories. One side looks at Caitlyn and sees focus. Pure, unapologetic focus. A player who doesn't care about fitting in, doesn't care about smiling for cameras, doesn't care about playing along with team politics. To them, she's a competitor in the rawest form. Someone who shows up, dominates, and leaves everything else out of it. They call her a silent assassin. Someone who doesn't need validation, doesn't need to be liked, and definitely doesn't need to perform for anyone outside the game itself. But then there's the other side. And they see something completely different. They don't see focus, they see distance. They don't see discipline, they see disconnection. To them, this isn't about being locked in. It's about being out of sync with the group. A player who isn't engaging, isn't building chemistry, and might be creating tension whether she means to or not. And in a team environment, especially at this level, that kind of perception matters. A lot. That's where the phrase started popping up more and more: she's not a team player. Not because of anything she said. Not because of anything confirmed. But because of how everything looks when you piece it together. The locker room clip, the silence at the podium, the contrast with Paige, the rotation decisions. It all feeds the same narrative. But there's another layer to this that makes it even more complicated. Because people haven't forgotten what happened before this tournament even started. The Olympic snub. That moment didn't just disappear. It stuck with fans. It's stuck with analysts. And whether anyone wants to admit it or not, it adds context to everything we're seeing now. Because when a player of her caliber gets left off a roster like that, it raises questions about how she's viewed internally. So now, when people see her not starting consistently, when they see her not being pushed to the front of the media, when they see her standing alone in that locker room, they start connecting it back. They start wondering if this is bigger than just this tournament. If there's something deeper going on behind the scenes, something that isn't being said publicly, but is showing up in subtle ways. And that's how the narrative shifts from speculation to suspicion. Because now it's not just, maybe she's different. Now it's, maybe she's being treated differently. And whether that's true or not almost doesn't matter anymore. Because once that idea takes hold, everything starts getting filtered through it. Every decision, every clip, every absence. It all starts to feel intentional. And that's when the conversation turns from curiosity into something much heavier. Once the conversation reaches this point, it stops being about personalities and starts circling around something people don't usually talk about openly: control. Because when things don't line up on the surface, people naturally start looking underneath. Not for drama, but for structure, for patterns, for decisions that don't quite make sense unless you assume there's something guiding them behind the scenes. And that's exactly where this situation starts to feel different. Because if you take everything at face value, the performance, the rotations, the media appearances, it creates a strange imbalance. The player producing the most isn't being positioned like the centerpiece. The player drawing the most attention isn't the one being put forward to represent the team publicly. And in a system as organized as Team USA basketball, that kind of imbalance usually isn't random. It's managed. Now, that doesn't automatically mean something negative is happening. There are always layers to decisions like this: coaching philosophy, locker room dynamics, long-term development, even branding considerations. But when all of those layers start pointing in the same direction, people begin to question the intent behind it. Because think about how carefully these environments are controlled. Who starts the game? Who closes it? Who speaks after? Who becomes the face of the moment? Those aren't small details. They shape how the entire team is perceived. And right now, it feels like those roles are being split in a very specific way. Caitlin handles the production. Others handle the presentation. It's a subtle divide, but once you see it, it's hard to ignore. And that's where the idea of internal politics starts creeping into the conversation. Not in an exaggerated, dramatic sense, but in a practical one. Every team has a hierarchy. Every program has an identity it wants to maintain. And sometimes, when a player's presence starts to grow faster than the system itself, there's an effort to balance that out. To keep things from tilting too far in one direction. If that's what's happening here, it would explain a lot. Why the minutes don't fully match the impact. Why the media exposure feels controlled. Why the tone around the team is being shaped through certain voices and not others. It wouldn't mean anyone is being pushed out. But it could mean someone is being contained. And that's a very different kind of situation. Because you can't contain what happens on the court forever. Performance always finds a way to stand out. Numbers don't adjust themselves to fit a narrative. But everything around the game, that can be guided. And if that's what we're seeing, even partially, it creates a tension that doesn't show up in the scoreboard, but can absolutely affect everything else. Because eventually, that balance becomes harder to maintain. Especially when the gap between performance and positioning keeps growing. For now, there's one thing keeping all of this from exploding into something bigger. They're winning. And winning has a way of covering everything up. It smooths over tension, quiets criticism, and gives everyone just enough justification to ignore what doesn't feel quite right. As long as the scoreboard looks good, most people are willing to look the other way. But that only works for so long. Because beneath the wins, there's a different question starting to form. One that doesn't go away just because the team is ahead. How sustainable is this? Because basketball at this level isn't just about talent. It's about timing, trust, and small moments that only work when everyone is fully connected. The extra pass. The defensive rotation. The instinct to move without thinking because you already know where your teammate is going to be. Those things don't come from skill alone. They come from chemistry. And chemistry isn't something you can fake when the pressure rises. Right now, Team USA has been able to rely on sheer ability. The roster is stacked, the matchups have been manageable, and Caitlyn's production has filled in any gaps that might otherwise show up. When one player is controlling the game at that level, it gives the illusion that everything is working perfectly. But that illusion gets tested the moment things tighten up. Stronger opponents. Closer games. Less margin for error. That's where the cracks, if they exist, start to show. Because if there really is a disconnect, if there's even a small gap between players off the court, it eventually leaks into the game itself. Not in obvious ways at first. It's subtle. A hesitation here. A missed read there. A moment where instinct gets replaced by second-guessing. And at this level, those moments matter. A lot. That's why people are starting to look ahead, not just at what's happening now, but at what could happen next. Because the deeper this tournament goes, the less room there is to rely on talent alone. Teams like Spain don't just fold. They force you to play together. They expose anything that isn't fully aligned. And if that alignment isn't there, it doesn't matter how good your best player is. That's the real risk in all of this. Not that Caitlyn is isolated. Not that Paige is becoming the voice. But that the balance between those two realities might not hold when it actually matters most. Because right now, everything is controlled. But pressure has a way of breaking control. And if that happens, the story won't be about a locker room clip anymore. It'll be about what happens when a team that looks perfect on paper has to prove it under pressure. At some point, this stops being just a Team USA story. Because what's happening here feels like a preview of something much bigger. Something the sport itself is still trying to figure out in real time. Caitlyn isn't just another player on a roster. She represents a shift. A different level of attention, a different level of pressure, and honestly, a different kind of spotlight that women's basketball hasn't consistently dealt with before. The audience is bigger. The expectations are louder. And every single move, on or off the court, gets magnified instantly. That kind of presence changes everything. Not just for her, but for everyone around her. Because when one player starts pulling that much attention, it creates an imbalance that teams aren't always prepared to handle. Teammates are still competing, still contributing, still playing at a high level, but the conversation starts orbiting around one name, whether they want it to or not. And that's where things can get complicated. Because sports have always been about balancing individuality with team identity. But when a player becomes this big, this fast, that balance gets tested. Do you lean into it and build around the star? Or do you try to keep the system intact and spread the spotlight evenly? Right now, it feels like Team USA is trying to do both. And that's not easy. On one side, you have Caitlyn, performing, producing, drawing attention whether she speaks or not. On the other, you have a system that still wants to emphasize unity, structure, and shared identity. Neither approach is wrong on its own. But together, they create friction. And that friction is exactly what we're seeing play out in small, subtle ways. The silence, the rotations, the media presence, the body language. Individually, none of it confirms anything. But collectively, it paints a picture of a team navigating something new, something they don't fully have a blueprint for yet. And maybe that's the real story here. Not that something is broken, but that something is changing. Because the truth is, every sport goes through this moment. That phase where a new kind of superstar comes in and forces everything to adjust. How teams operate, how media covers the game, how fans engage with it. And it's never smooth. There's always tension. Always questions. Always moments that feel slightly off before everything finds its balance again. If you've been following all of this closely, you can probably feel that shift happening right now. It's subtle, but it's there. And honestly, it's what makes this situation so interesting to watch. Because we're not just seeing a tournament unfold. We're watching a turning point. At the end of the day, that locker room clip might end up being remembered as more than just a viral moment. It's a snapshot. Not just of one player standing alone, but of a team, and maybe even a sport, trying to figure itself out in real time. Because when you strip everything else away, the debates, the theories, the opinions, you're left with something simple and hard to ignore. The most productive player on the team looks like the most isolated person in the room. And there are only two possibilities. Either she's choosing that distance, or something pushed her there. And until we hear directly from her, until we actually see what's happening beyond the clips and the numbers, that question isn't going anywhere. It's only going to get louder. So now it turns to you. What do you think is really going on here? Is this just focus being misunderstood? Or is there something deeper happening behind the scenes that we're only starting to see? Drop your thoughts below. I read all of them. And if you want more breakdowns like this, where we go beyond the surface and really unpack what's happening in sports right now, make sure you like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.